All right, good afternoon, folks. Mike Watkins from Internet Partnership Radio and podweather.com.
And I'm Jim Williams from hurricanecity.com. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining in. We're here at the 2006 Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference, and it's the first time I've had a chance. Jim and I have talked a couple times, but we have never really sat down and gone through one of these audio interviews or back and forth. So, I guess, Jim, we're going to talk about a couple things here today.
Well, first, I wanted to ask you, how is your visit so far to the conference, and have you had a chance to meet a lot of people here?
Yeah, Jim, it's been, this is our second trip to the Governor's Conference. We went last year, was our first trip to the Governor's Conference in Tampa, and we got a chance to meet a lot of people, and we've met a lot of those same people this year. So we've run into folks like, we just finished talking to Billy Wagner from the Keys, and I know you know him pretty well. I think you're going to dinner with him tonight, or...
Well, we were. We went to have lunch today, actually.
Oh, okay, something like that. And then I got a chance to talk to Dr. William Gray from Colorado State, along with Philip Foxbach from there, and Max, and great guy, Daniel Noah down at Ruskin, Tampa, or up at the Ruskin National Weather Service office, who's always been very helpful with us. So, and plus just, we got a chance to see the governor yesterday, so it's just been a great opportunity for us to get the word from the experts. But I know you've also run into some people here too.
I have, but what I find amusing, Mike, is there's a lot of nameless, faceless people, faces with no names walking around here. You have 3,500, 4,000 people walking around with small name tags where you have to look down at their stomach or their crotch to find out who they are, which is kind of uncomfortable, So I recognize the people that I know from TV, and I've talked to them over the phone, a few of them. The people, for example, earlier today I had a chance to meet with Steve Litro, Chris Lancey, and Dr. Jack Bevan all at the same time. We were just talking, the four of us, about past hurricanes and reanalyzing the strength of the past hurricanes, because some of them may have been overestimated, including Hurricane Camille.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting, but I didn't want to whip out my microphone in the middle of a conversation like that, so it was kind of awkward. So I haven't really recorded any interviews at this conference, because most of them have been on the fly, like Phil Klotzbach. He was the first person I ran into when I got here, and we had a nice conversation about global warming, but no interview. It was just face-to-face talking,
Yeah, well, and I know that you've done that many times in the past, where you've gone we went to the National a couple of years ago and sat down, and that was the goal for that year. But this year you're kind of from the other side, where you're really going through all the seminars and doing
I did that in New Orleans as well. The workshops are great because you learn so much about the way everything works, forecasting, and the way the media presents things, and you can ask questions, and a lot of people ask questions that are good questions that I didn't even think of, so that you learn a lot at those workshops. And there's a lot of them here. A lot of different options.
And I mean, you've been, when's the first year you went to one of these?
2004, not 2004, that was last year. It was 2003 in Tampa. I went to the Florida Governor's Conference in Tampa.
So that was like a different era, because you're coming off the 2002 season. Right. And now, because especially, I'm just curious what your, kind of what your perspective is from how this kind of event has changed since we had all these storms out there.
Well, in Tampa, there was just talk of, that was the Governor's Conference, not the National, so it was more Florida-based information. When you go to the national conferences, it's more of a national crowd there, so you can get more information nationally. At that conference, it was more talking about what's to come, because we hadn't really been tested. And Mike, you know this as well as I do, we haven't had the major big one coming through here yet.
Not yet.
And what really irritated me today to hear was a lot of the bragging from the state of Florida. The emergency managers, the governor, everybody, there's nobody like us. We're the best. We know how to do everything right. And the reality of it is we haven't been put to the test, because we've been having Category 1s and 2s coming through, with the exception of Charlie, which is small, so they could get into those areas and help those people quickly and do a good job of it. And with Ivan, we had a storm surge situation, but it still wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Right.
So I don't think we've really been put to the test in the state of Florida. I think we have a lot of work to do yet.
Yeah, I think I agree with that because we, and if last year, I know you went to the National, and we didn't go to the National last year. We went to the Florida conference, and I think everyone had a sense that they were battle tested from what happened in '04.
Right.
But really, I mean, other than Dennis, and well, obviously Wilma was bad, but I mean, Wilma didn't really bring any surge to where people live. I know we got some down there in the Everglades, but it wasn't the same thing as a hurricane coming into Miami or something coming into Tampa or something coming in. And even the scope of Wilma's, and we know from living down here, the scope seemed to overwhelm the resources, and I kind of got the sense that they said, well, we're not perfect, and we know we had our challenges, but with Wilma, it was a Category 1 hurricane.
I know. I ran into Tony Carper in one of the workshops, and he was talking about the aftermath of Wilma. And my question to him was the storm surge situation. We're looking, the camera can't see it here, but out in that glass behind the camera there's the intercoastal waterway, and I fear that intercoastal waterway is going to rise up and it's going to swallow all the homes around the intercoastal waterway and come pretty far inland, maybe not to I-95, it'll come up to Federal at least, and maybe even further, and we don't really hear much of that. All we hear about is the wind possibilities, and I asked Tony Carper that, and he goes, yeah, I'm concerned about a 12-foot wall of water coming in here, and, it's something that I think needs to be talked about a lot more.
Yeah, and, I don't, you go back to 65, Betsy came in, but even then it was south of here. So you got to go back to the 60s before you had a storm that made landfall that brought a significant surge in here. And there's been, 50 years plus of development since then.
Right.
And, yeah.
Mike, how long have you lived here in Florida?
Let's see, 15 years, so since 1991.
Okay, so you were here for the Andrew.
So I was here for Andrew, Irene, and George.
So you remember Andrew, all the catastrophe down there, and that was the last time we've really been put to the test hardcore. And we failed that test.
Miserably.
So I'm concerned the next time around, and I think that the Tony Carper from Broward County and these guys really need to consider major hurricane hitting, not just Category 1 or 2, and the surge is way underestimated in my opinion.
Yeah, and you know what? After Wilma down here, we had a lot of folks pack up and go up to, Port Stewart. They went further north, Port St. Lucie, Orlando. If we get say something on the scale of the 26th hurricane through here again, those places are going to be without power too, and you're not going to be able to get to where you need to go on a tank of gas. And I don't think people understand that, because I've run into a lot of people, not just here, but just in Florida in general, and they'll say something like, well, yeah, if another hurricane comes, I'll just, it'll cost me a week in Orlando, but I'll be fine. And I don't think folks understand at the planning or at the citizen level what we may be up against this year. I don't know.
Yeah, it greatly concerns me, not just for here, but for many areas along the eastern seaboard that haven't been hit in a long time, up in the northeast, for example. I know Joe Vistar, you guys talked about him quite a bit, his predictions and everything. So what do you see this year, Mike? What are you looking at? What's your opinion on the season coming up?
Well, obviously we know we're in an active phase. We know that the Atlantic is warmer than it normally is at this time. Even if you look at a map today, there's all sorts of yellows and reds on the anomalies. So we know the sea surface temperatures are there.
Right.
We don't see any sign of El Nino. So you add those two things together and it looks active. So then, of course, the question everybody has is, how many storms are we going to get and where are they going to hit? Well, how many we're going to get, I don't do seasonal predictions, but it looks like obviously we're going to be above average, and I'm just going to leave that to Dr. Gray and Noah to do that. But then the second question is, where are they going to go? And it's been shown, and we know from the 40s and 50s when we got all these hurricanes, is that when we would get in a pattern where we'd have a landfall, we'd get in this trough ridge pattern, 30s, big trough, not so many landfalls here in Florida, 40s and 50s, a ridge there every year, that once these features set up, they tend to persist. So given all that, you got to think that we're not going to get a 1995 or a 90, or or any of those years we had the big trough, 99, to take everything out away from us down here. So, without getting in, I'm not going to forecast anything for any one area, but if somebody asked me if I was betting or not betting, if I would bet, where would I put my money? Landfalls this year? No, I'd say certainly we'd have more. Because you've got more storms. The pattern looks like it's going to allow storms to get across the Atlantic, at least some of them, hopefully not all of them. And that's the other thing. Last year we didn't have any, everything developed so close in, it was bad for us, but we didn't have those long track Cape Verde hurricanes. I think we're going to be back to that.
It's interesting you say that about everything developing close in, because the dry air last year, I think, was a huge factor in these systems developing in the Bahamas and in the Caribbean before they came toward the United States. And I believe that it wasn't the African air that was dry, because the the intertropical convergence zone was active, but coming out of Africa, there was really no dry air. But as soon as they hit the ocean, they started getting wrapped up in the dry air, and they kept their circulation, but they weren't able to develop until they got to about 60 west. So if that happens again this year, then again that's a much higher risk for the southeastern United States, and that's the big question. Are we going to see all that dry air out there this year? We kind of feel like the high pressure ridge is going to be there. It's been pretty persistent. So that's my thinking, is the dry air is going to be a huge factor.
Yeah, that last year we had that trough, and it just seemed like it just sat in the central Atlantic all year long. And Katrina, doing some debate whether or not what was Tropical Depression 10 was maintained when it became Katrina down the road because of all that shear in the middle.
Right.
So you got to figure that's not going to happen. But I know you're looking at let me reset this, and for some of my listeners or some of our listeners, because I know you're going to be playing some of this audio too, but Hurricane City's been around since when did you start that?
I started it in 1997, and it used to be called Jim's Hurricane Web. That's the name of it when I started it, and GeoCities. And then I acquired a domain name in late 1997. 1998 is when I went full-time with the audio and the whole 9 yards. I got started on the audio with the Weather Information Network. Jeff Gammons from weathervine.com, and his uncle started doing, occasionally they would do a live update for, when Jeff was in a hurricane. And I said, why don't we do a show, like a regular show about hurricanes and, bad weather disasters and things like that, So I'd be calling them on the phone. Larry, Jeff's uncle, and he'd be working, and I'd say, Larry, let's go live. There's a tornado on the ground or something like that. And he'd be whispering on the phone, Jim, I can't talk right now. I'm at work. I can't do this, So I got kind of frustrated, and I felt like I could do more on my own by just doing my own stuff, because I'm free. I'm pretty free to do what I want at my own business, so it allows me the time to do stuff like this.
Right. So you got that going, and you started doing, was it real audio at first back then?
Yep, still real audio. I was doing just audio only, and then about, I'd say 2 years ago, I started doing video, and not just video of hurricanes making landfall, but I do video updates on my website to give people an idea like what the models are thinking, and I do a brief update that's maybe 4 minutes long, 5 minutes long when there's a hurricane in the Atlantic for maybe once a day. I'll update that.
Right. And so, and then the thing is that you would do, and you still do, because I know you used to like patch in, or you would work with some of the local stations to get information out, or did you do that? I guess.
No, I never worked with the local radio stations. Right now, I'm working with a couple of stations in the Panhandle, and they had me on their shows. It started before Ivan, and they've had me on regularly since then. But locally, I haven't done any. You guys, I've heard you doing some stuff with some radio stations. Have you been doing that?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it was Tampa WFLA a couple times, and then
a little station, right?
Yeah, a little tiny 2-market state, but that was mostly in 04, and then obviously I'm working with Mark, and so we do kind of via that we've done some stuff, but we're working on that. But
yeah, that's a good question. Speaking of Mark Stitt of hurricanetrack.com, now you just teamed up with him last year.
Yeah, we've been talking to him since 04, and then actually joined the team full time in 05.
Okay, now Mark's been doing this a long time, filming hurricanes from the eye, right? He tries to get to where the eye is and get it on film.
Right.
Now with you guys in the hurricane, are you doing broadcasts from the hurricane from time to time?
Yeah, what we'll do is I'll try to phone in. Like if you listen to some of the video clips, you'll hear me yammering in the background. That's me calling back in through the station. So what I try to do when I'm out is I don't actually run a broadcast, but I call in and participate, take questions, and let folks know what's going on, which is good. I was able to call in from the eye of Katrina, for example, or both times. Yeah, we had more coverage from the Fort Lauderdale Katrina because of the time of day it happened, but people weren't listening in the morning when Katrina was coming. But and things like that. So yeah, that's a good benefit of it. But unfortunately, most of the time I spend, we get set up, get the information deployed or the weather equipment deployed, and all that. There's so much setup that's involved that I wish I could call in more than I do.
With that said, I gotta compliment you guys. You're here at the conference this year. I think you were at the last year's one as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you set everything up to do video and live broadcasts from the thing. And this is something that, a couple of years I had Bob working on my network doing the Barometer Bob show. We had talked about going to a conference and doing a live thing. We actually talked about going down to the Hurricane Center and covering right down from the Hurricane Center. And you need the air card that you have here. I don't know if that's not what that is, but you need to have an air card, not an air card, an air card with good broadband upload speed in order to pull up, and then you have to stream at a bit rate that is able to be easily streamed, but it's hard to get a good clear picture, from the road. Now, you guys have done a great job at that, though. And what are your plans for the future?
Well, I know Mark has been working with Sprint. For telecommunications. Well, what do you mean for the station or
for your IPR?
Okay. Well, our plans this year, like for example, next week we've got the company I work for. When I'm not doing all this, is having a hurricane fair. We're going to stream directly from there. Our goal is to try to do more live, direct things from actually in the field. We've got a lot of folks who are along the eastern seaboard who participate. But because I'm mobile, I'm going to try to do some more live things. But predominantly the goal is to continue to bring in folks. I mean, we've got a guy named Charlie Wilson out of Maryland he's in Maryland, right? Yeah. So who does a show on Tuesday nights, and he does a great job with that. And he works with a guy up from Indiana who covers severe weather. Michael Moss. Yeah, you know Michael. I'm sure you know Michael. And so those two together, do that, and then Mike Naso and Zach Fridello. One is in New Orleans, one's in I think Cleveland, Ohio, of all places. Do a show on Wednesdays, and then right before my show on Thursdays, we have a guy Clint Perkins, who does a tremendous job doing severe weather and chasing in Texas. So by putting all of these people together, the plan is to continue to add to the lineup. So we've got a variety of voices, coverage, perspectives, not just about hurricanes, but about all different kinds of weather. Because I'll be the first to say I don't know anything about predicting a winter weather event. I'm not real good with tornadoes anymore. I just looking at a winter map, I'm no good with winter. I just don't. I'm not familiar with the contours like I am with the tropics. So, but by putting all that together, that's where.
Well, that's the good thing about the way you're doing this. You have teamwork. A lot of people, it takes a lot to do this kind of stuff, and I know because I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
It's just doing audio in the beginning was a pain in the neck. Just a simple thing like having a mic screen on there so you don't get the noise.
Right.
I mean, just working out the little details like that, but doing it remotely is very impressive. I do everything in the studio.
Right.
My shows are all done from there, and all the stuff like this is recorded and then uploaded at a later time.
Right.
So I wish you the best of luck in this venture you have going here. It's working out pretty good, and just want people to let people know it's not as easy as it looks.
No way. And like when we do a live, when we have somebody just to get a guest to call in to a show, we need at least 4 people to make that work right. Because you need somebody, the host, then you need somebody to handle the phone call, and usually, like when we have, like if you called into our show tonight. Paul and Maples would take the call, feed it into our studio, and then I would talk to you. So, and that takes 2. Then you need somebody to monitor the stream the whole time, and then you need somebody to test the phone call. So every time we need 4 guys, and there's, 10 or 11 people that are working constantly behind the scenes to make things go, and obviously they don't get a lot of credit. But so we appreciate that, and yeah, that everybody makes it go. But then back to your deal, though, you're still, I mean, like during Katrina, for example, you helped Mark out because one of the storm cases that was there that was feeding back this valuable video was lost forever in the surge. But because of the things that you're doing live there, you're able to grab it. But so not only were you kind of the first in here, but now you've really integrated the meat. If you can talk, I guess, talk about that.
Well, I felt like for just doing audio, you can only express so much to the point where you have to start pointing things out to people, and that's where I decided to start bringing video into the whole thing. Using the HurTrack program, that's huge because George Zambetero from the HurTrack program has given me the EM Pro version to use the products on the broadcast so people can see the wind fields, they can see the projected wind speeds at certain locations.
Right.
The slosh maps are huge. People want to know how far is the water going to come in on me, so I show those on the broadcast. And it really helps to be able to show people what's happening. And then when you guys enter the picture, while you're chasing, I can pull that video in and show people what's happening at ground level. And, you guys, you know this, you're not always going to be in the right place to get a good connection or a good video. You might be in a dark location or between two buildings, you can't see what's going on. So what I do is flip back and forth between your video and the networks. I'll use CNN, MSNBC, the local networks, internet streams that happen to be going on. And my favorite is webcam capture software. It's a software that captures all the webcams, and I'll pre-program them when a hurricane is about ready to make landfall, and I'll pre-program them into the Mississippi. I'll get all the cams in Mississippi, and then I can just hit a button and just go from one cam to the next. So people can see all the different cam shots, and then I switch back to your live video. And it's a nice conglomeration and stuff for people. But Mike, we got to get to the forecasting stuff real quick.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely.
I got my predictions just about buttoned down for this year's for June 1st. I release them on June 1st, but and I know you're not a big fan of the pick of the city based on climatology, but the last 4 years, 3 out of the last 4 years, I picked the #1 city to be hit, and many of my top 5 have been affected. Now you might say, well, that's common because we've got so many hurricanes out there. I mean, how can you miss, right? But there are trends to the northern Gulf Coast getting hit, and whenever there's 14 or more named storms, 60% of the time, I don't know the exact percentage, but the northern Gulf Coast gets hit.
Right.
So there is something to be said about trends when you look back at climatology. So that's one of the factors. And then, of course, whether the area is due or overdue for a hurricane or a tropical storm. And if all these things line up, including environmental factors, I'll put certain cities at higher risk. And right now, the top of the list is Mobile, Alabama, once again, Pascagoula, Mississippi, that was affected by Katrina last year. So I'm very concerned about the northern Gulf. And if we continue with this dry May down here in South Florida, I'm very concerned about South Florida because if you look back in history, every year that there's been 4 inches or less of rain in South Florida, in May we've been hit by a major hurricane.
Yeah, and I'm not against anything that you're doing in particular, but and I know I've come out in the past, and because the way I kind of look at hurricane climatology, there are folks out there who put out these nice shiny maps, who have all these things highlighted. Some guys, like the guy at AccuWeather now, has created his own hurricane intensity scale that he's using to verify, and I think that confuses people, and I think it sends the wrong message. The way you do it's a little bit different in the sense that it's really done, you don't pick 1 or 2 areas, but you do,
let me make it
wide
clear. I make it clear to people when I make these picks that there's going to be areas that are going to get hit that aren't on my list. Last year, South Florida got hit. That wasn't on my list.
Right.
So it doesn't. All it means is these cities are at higher risk based on all the numbers. That's all it means. It doesn't mean they're going to get hit, but the chances are pretty darn good. If you look at the track record, it's been pretty good.
Yeah, I think especially the northern Gulf correlation makes a lot of sense if it's an active year because you got stuff getting something gets into the Gulf of Mexico. It just almost has to, and that kind of thing.
You look at 1933, that's the way it was. They all developed close to home, and then a lot of them made it in the Gulf.
Just like last year, which is a whole other thing. I mean, like when you get all that development, people think, well, it's bad news when you see a hurricane develop out by the Cape Verde Islands, but I kind of look at it as good news because we know 3 out of 4 of those turn out to sea before they ever bother anyone. When they get all the way over 60 west, they're going to bother. They almost have to hit somebody to get out. So, but yeah. So you've been doing that for a long time, and it fits. What you're doing fits the domain of what you cover. The website's Hurricane City, and it makes sense for you to talk. Yeah. So I have no problem with that. Where I get into problems is when guys create their own scales. Guys say that a certain particular area that happens to be hugely laden in subscribers is due for a hurricane.
You're right. And stirring people up when there's really no data there to support it. They're just, I think the Mid-Atlantic this year is at high risk, and then all the media in the Mid-Atlantic goes crazy.
Right.
Because they said, because they're a big media company themselves, that they said something, so therefore there must be some truth to it. If I say something, I'm just Jim on the internet from Hurricane City, nobody's going to pay attention to that, but Joe Bastardi comes out and says it. It's a big
Well, yeah, he's got access to the media, he's working through the television where a lot of people...
He's on MSNBC all the time, yeah.
And they don't have, folks don't have time in a 30-second or a minute or a 2-minute news burst to go through all the details, but when you dig in there and say, well, wait, he's got a new scale that he's going to use this year, he's picking Long Island of all places, to get hit, and, we've got to get away, and I don't know, a lot of these folks away from these deterministic yes or no, is a place going to get hit or not, and start working on the probability side, which is what, so Plotspot is doing with Colorado State, and so I think those types of non-deterministic, probabilistic type of forecasts are the way to go, but then how do you communicate that to people to where they can understand it? And I know the Hurricane Center struggles with that too.
All right, now one more question, and I know you guys are busy, but I wanted to ask you about your theory on the global warming's impact on the hurricanes. That's the hot subject, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know I've listened to a couple of your shows, and you said that you don't believe that global warming, has an impact on hurricane season, and you can't look at the last couple of years and draw any conclusion that the ocean temperatures are causing more hurricanes.
Right.
Now, I've done my own research on this over the last, between 1930 and 1970. Now, I'm going to speak in generals here, but I don't have the exact figures.
Right.
But 1930 to 1970, the average wind speed was 10 miles an hour lower in any 10-year period than it was the last 10 years. And there's 170 named storms the last 10 years. You go back in history, in any 10-year period, there's, I think the highest decade was 1950 to 1960, 115 named storms. So we're almost double the named storms and 10 miles an hour stronger on average the last 10 years. So that makes me wonder, are we really seeing something here? And are we sure, because I know Dr. Gray likes to come out and say this is just decadal, it's going to cool again and we're going to go back into this. But the Atlantic thermaline circulation core samples they've been taking from different areas to find out how long the Atlantic thermaline circulation's been in existence and how often it stops and speeds up, they found out that over periods of 100 years it can go through these ebbs and flows. Mm-hmm. So could we be in a 100-year cycle right now of a flow that's causing ocean temperatures to continue to rise and hurricanes get stronger?
Well, it's a lot of ground to cover, but first, the first thing about the data set, and there's, that's one of the questions we're lucky enough to ask Philip yesterday. We talked to him before, and so we've got some of this is information that we've talked through him, and obviously that's a source that disagrees with that theory. And I've looked in the studies of Emmanuel and Masters and Curry, who were at the Florida Governors Conference, and read them thoroughly. And one of the things that they're basing these conclusions that we're in an active, that we've got more hurricanes and we've got stronger hurricanes than ever before, is a data set that goes back into the the 30s and 40s and 50s. The problem is that we didn't have geosynchronous satellites until 1974. We didn't have a way to estimate intensity at night on the current standard until 1984.
Right.
And we know now that, for example, at night, hurricanes tend to be stronger tend to reach their convective maximum at night, or like Wilma did, and that kind of thing. So you throw all those things together, and now that we have the remote sensing equipment and all that, the measurements is measuring stronger winds, or we're able to determine more things about a storm we didn't know before. And if Wilma, if you put in 1975, if Wilma occurred, we may have never seen the eye when it was 2 miles wide. The resolution of the satellite was good. So I think once you add all those things in, there's enough in the data set to at least question, concluding based especially on intensity, what was stronger versus weaker. But in terms of the Atlantic, there's no question about the fact that the Atlantic warming is causing more Atlantic hurricanes. The big question is global warming the culprit of the Atlantic warming, or is it some other natural process?
Well, see, this is where I get a little aggravated when I hear people say it's a right away. If you say to somebody you expect increases in hurricane activity because of global warming, they get defensive and make it look like it's the United States causing this. That's not what I'm implying.
No.
Because global warming could be something that's a 1,000-year cycle that has nothing to do with man whatsoever.
Absolutely, yeah.
And also we have these fissures, these earthquake underground volcanoes that are spewing hot ash into the ocean all the time, and that could be another thing that's heating up the ocean that's really not talked about that much. That's these vents that are creating the hot gases into the oceans and causing the temperatures to rise, which is fuel for hurricanes. So we're not talking man here. That's at least that's what I think.
Yeah, no, and I didn't mean to imply that, but I think it was MIT last year, the GFDL lab, that came up and said at the most we're going to see a half a degree Celsius of warming globally, or maybe we've even seen, let's say even at the most in the next 100 years we have a half a degree Celsius increase in sea surface temperatures, and some of the experts will say it's going to be 2 or 5, but let's take it at 5, a half a degree Celsius worldwide. If you add that, if you take that potential energy and put it in a hurricane, it might be 5, might be 10 miles per hour or more. So it's not going to be the difference between maybe a Katrina being a 1 and Katrina being a 5, but maybe as the wind's 140 instead of 150 or 155. And that's well beyond our ability to measure it even with the best reconnaissance aircraft now. So I just think there's a lot of uncertainty in that. And so although I'm not completely discounting the theory, I do. The people, like the big folks who have gone back and looked at it, like for example, Kerry Emanuel applied a reduction from Chris Lancy to the data set pre-1970 because of he thought Atlantic hurricanes were overestimated. Now there's some question whether or not that reduction is even fair to apply. Then Webster and Curry.
Well, he could have a point because the hurricanes, as much as you say, well, we didn't have satellites and we couldn't see the pinhole eye. How do we know that we weren't overestimating some of these hurricanes?
We don't.
We found out that some of these recent hurricanes that have hit were not as strong as we originally thought. They make landfall. It's like, oh my God, this wasn't a Category 4, this was a Category 3. Or on Ivan's case, this wasn't a 3, this was like a Category 2. So that's the factor too, especially when you go back and use land observations from 50 years ago, where all they had was barometers, because their anemometers weren't worth, I don't even know if they used them, but for pressure doesn't always correlate to winds.
Right.
So there we go again. We don't know if they were as strong as we think they were, and in your case, we don't know how many were out there because they didn't have satellites. So it offsets,
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. In fact, we were going to ask Max about this, but didn't get a chance to. But if you look at the background pressure in the last 2 years, for example, the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, the wind pressure relationships that we thought we should see in Wilma weren't there. Like Wilma wasn't 190 knots, but we had 882 millibars at the time. Katrina, the pressure gets down to 902, 903 millibars, and it's barely a Category 5 hurricane, whereas, in 92, Andrew was 922 and was a Category 5.
Right.
So, there's, and I don't know if we've looked at this.
There's so much uncertainty.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
You can't really say for sure, and this is why it drives me crazy when it says decadal, because that's implying that you're going to have an active period followed by a slow period, followed by an active period again. And what do we have? 3 sets there? We have slow, busy, slow, and busy. That's all we have to go by.
Yeah, reliably. I mean, you go back, Dr. Lancy's done a ton of reanalysis and gone back into the early 1800s and found he thinks that the late 1890s were more active than the last 2 years we've had here. but we don't know because we didn't have a way to measure it. And then, yeah, you got to go back. I mean, he literally would go. He went back to ship logs and medical doctor log, to get all this information. Then it got quiet in the early 1900s through late 30s, and got up again. But that's 100 years, and the plant's been around for a lot longer than that.
That's right.
And we don't know.
There's a lot we don't know, and that's my point. We can't jump to conclusions about decadal because we just don't know. This could go on for 50 years. We don't. This activity could be something we've never seen before.
Yeah, and the only way, hopefully, you and I will still be around when it comes to an end. But
if we don't get killed by a Category 5 coming through here.
We probably won't be living in Florida, but we'll be living somewhere.
All right, Michael, it was great doing this interview,
too,
this show with you, and you're very knowledgeable. And we have some disagreements, but we both agree on a lot of things as well. So
it's good to talk about them too because we can get good ideas and bounce them back and forth. So, and hopefully, as the season moves on, hopefully we can talk again. And it's good to sit down.
Good to be here at the conference. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim.